dynasty owner, and in particular, what we're going to talk about this week is we're going to talk about how to draft a dynasty owner champion. And this is part 2 in our series. The first week, what we did was we analyzed measures that didn't involve players in the first article. And the video you can check out on YouTube. In the article you can get on Dynasty Owner. But what we did was we talked about like the type of league you should get in, when to draft your team, and if there's a particular draft position that you want to have when drafting your Dynasty Owner startup team. But there was nothing really overwhelming in the data to help you draft there. So now we've got more data and we can analyze some more questions. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to look at positions and salaries of first round picks and sort of say, does it make a difference? Does it matter what position you draft? Does it matter how much in salary your first round pick makes? Is that important? And so the first question that we're going to answer here is, what position should you draft with your first pick? As we all know, if you don't know, Dynasty Owner is weighted towards quarterbacks. The scoring system, unlike most leagues where you get 4 points for throwing touchdown, in Dynasty Owner you get 6. So that inflates the scoring for quarterbacks, which is good and bad. But what it means is that Dynasty Owner is more quarterback driven than other fantasy leagues you may play in. It's more like the NFL. I mean, the NFL is a very quarterback driven league, and Dynasty Owner is similar. You know, the top scorers are usually quarterbacks. In 2019, out of the top 25, 19 of those top 25 top scorers were quarterbacks, with Lamar Jackson being the top scorer. Last year, Aaron Rodgers was the top scorer and as a quarterback, and 18 out of the 25 top scorers were quarterbacks. So the question is, do you take one of those top scoring guys? Do you draft a quarterback with your first pick? Do you pick another position, pivot off that, and sort of try to find somebody who's going to score a lot of points at a position that's not as high scoring, but maybe differentiates you from that? So we can look at some data, and what we can see with this is that teams drafted, most Dynasty Owner teams, is the percentage of all teams playing Dynasty Owner. 60% drafted a running back with their first pick, and 36% drafted a quarterback, and 5% drafted a wide receiver, and there was a couple who drafted George Kittle, or one drafted a kicker. So we won't talk about that because we think that was a mistake. But as we can see, so basically what you find is that the quarterbacks were taken about a third of the time. So the question is it more, are you going to win or are you going to lose if you take a quarterback in the first round? And the data shows here is that it's not much different. If you drafted a quarterback, you 36% drafted a quarterback in the first round, 38% of winners did, and 40% of the top 25 and the top 10 drafted a quarterback. So the difference is there's little to no difference in terms of the number of teams who drafted a quarterback versus a running back, and the number of winners who drafted a quarterback versus a running back. The small note is that wide receiver went down a little bit, went from 5% down to 3%. And then if you look here at the chase for the ring teams in the top 25 and the top 10, there were no teams who finished in the top 25 of the chase for the ring who drafted a wide receiver. So probably it seems like, based on last year's data, not a good idea to draft a wide receiver if you want to sort of make it to the chase and have a chance to win the ring. So the next thing we want to, so that's what position you should draft. Now we're going to look at, next thing we're going to look at is, so is there a difference in how much salary should your first round pick make? I mean, NFL players, there's a wide variety of salaries. You know, last year you had Alvin Kamara, who made under $1 million. You had Russell Wilson, the top player, making $35 million a year, and all sorts of players in between. Some of the better players were under $10 million. Your Lamar Jacksons, your Christian McCaffreys, your Saquon Barkleys, you know, and then you had some guys who are really good but make a lot of money. Your Michael Thomases, your Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs. I mean, so there's a wide range of guys, and it's sort of like, is there a difference in terms of what salary people make and whether you should be drafting them in the first round? So we've got some more data here, And we can see from the data that going low is probably a good idea, because overall 9% of teams drafted a player with their first pick who made under $1 million in salary. But the numbers doubled to 18% of people who won their league who did so. The numbers in the middle from 1 million to 10 million are pretty even. But then when you look at 10 million or higher, you can see 12% of teams drafted a player who makes $10 million a year or more last year. But only 6% of those teams actually won their Dynasty Owner Championship. So that's very interesting. And I don't have the data here, but there was a handful of people who drafted one of those highly paid quarterbacks, your Russell Wilsons, your Aaron Rodgers, your Tom Brady's as their number one pick. And in fact, none of those people actually won a Dynasty Owner League. So if you drafted one of the highly paid quarterbacks, not on a rookie contract in the first round last year, you did not win your Dynasty Owner League. But that's interesting because all three of those players that I talked about, Rodgers, Brady, and Wilson, they all finished in the top 7 in scoring. So you might be saying to yourself, well, that doesn't make sense. I mean, I'm taking one of the top scoring players and I don't win my league. I mean, so it seems that that seems like it's not possible, not what should happen. Well, so then what happened? What happened here? So we can go back and we can look at the data again, and we can see that if you want to finish in the top 25 of the chase for the ring, the differences is even more stark. Players who, 18% of winners had a person who made under $1 million a year. We have 32% who finished in the top 25, and 4 out of the top 10, they all drafted Alvin Kamara, who made the top 10 of the chase for the ring had guys who made under $1 million. But if you go to the bottom, you can see the 10 million salary or higher. Nobody made the top 25 in the chase for the ring. So if you drafted Michael Thomas, Ezekiel Elliott, or anybody else who made $10 million or more with your first pick in Dynasty Owner last year, you did not. None of them made the top 25 in the chase. And that's kind of what it's all about. I mean, you want to win your league. It gives you, drafting one of those guys gives you a lower chance of winning your league, and it gives you no chance of even winning the ring. So, that's that. But then some people might point out to me, it's like, well, those $10 million a year guys that you're talking about are Ezekiel Elliott, who underperformed, and Michael Thomas, who was injured for most of the year. So, the question is, did injuries influence this data? Is it skewed because of those two guys being a lot of the players who were drafted who made $10 million a year? So the way to look at this is, well, if that's the case, then probably what ended up happening was that players who make less, but were also injured, probably weren't on a lot of winners or chase for the ring teams. So we can look at that. The first step to looking at that is to sort of see, what players can we compare them to? And the players that I chose were the following. I mean, all highly picked in the first round, and all sort of either got injured, underperformed, or maybe a combination of both. We can see from here we've got Lamar Jackson, who was drafted in the first round on 100% of leagues. Him, Christian McCaffrey, and Saquon Barkley were the only 3 people taken in the first round in every Dynasty Owner League draft. And you can see why. Lamar's salary is $2.4 million. Christian McCaffrey is $4.3, and Saquon Barkley was $7.8 million a year. But all those guys either underperformed or were injured for the year. I mean, Lamar Jackson, you might say, well, did he really underperform? Well, he was pretty much like the number 1 or 2 pick. I think his ADP was in under 3, and he finished as the number 11 quarterback and the number 11 overall player in Dynasty Owner. So yeah, he did underperform. Christian McCaffrey, I mean, he played 3 games. Saquon Barkley, he played 2. And then you go down further and you talk about your Ezekiel Elliott. Did he underperform? Yeah, I mean, he was drafted in the first round in 75% of leagues. By 75% of teams drafted him in the first round, or a team drafted him in the first round, and with his $15 million salary. but he ended up as the number 9 running back in Dynasty Owner last year and the number 58 player overall. So clear underperformance. Next, you've got Michael Thomas, who 43% of was drafted in 43% of leagues with a number 1 first-round draft pick. And he only played 7 games. You got Miles Sanders, who's a little bit of a combination of both underperformance and injuries. He played 12 games, but he really didn't do very well in those 12 games. He was the number 26 overall running back, but he was still taken in the first round in 34% of leagues. And finally, Joe Mixon, who played 6 games and was drafted in 26% of leagues. So that's sort of your list of underperformers and injured players. And you see we've got a salary range here. We've got 2 guys who make under $2 million a year. We've got 2 guys who make between 2 and 5. And we've got Barkley, who makes about 8. So he makes between 5 and 10. And then we've got Elliott and Thomas, the 2 guys who sort of you couldn't draft and make the chase to look at. So the question is, then sort of, okay, now we're looking at injuries. Did that influence the data? And so we've looked overall, but now we've got to look at what happened with winners. Were winners more likely to have drafted these guys? And interestingly, 8% of winners drafted either Lamar Jackson or Christian McCaffrey, while only 4% drafted Saquon Barkley, 3% drafted Mixon or Miles Sanders, as well as Ezekiel Elliott, and just 1% of Dynasty Owner winners had Michael Thomas as their first-round pick. And then for the top 25, you can see 4 people took Lamar Jackson, 2 took McCaffrey, and 1 each had Barkley and Mixon. So you can see that it's sort of the bottom 2 are the higher salary players in Elliott and Thomas. But, Sanders and Mixon are kind of tied with Elliott there. So, but remember, Elliott was drafted in more leagues in the first round than either Mixon or Sanders. So when we combine the 2 measures, what are we looking at? What are we looking at here? And so what we're looking at here is we can see that Joe Mixon was on 12% of winning teams with his salary. Sanders was on 9% of winning teams with his salary. Jackson was on 8%, and so was Christian McCaffrey. And then it kind of drops when you get to those higher salary players. The Barkley at $7.8 million, Elliott at $15 million, and Michael Thomas at $19 million. So to me, it looks like you can overcome an injury to your first round pick if that first round pick had a low salary. Otherwise, if you spent a lot of your salary cap or a significant portion of your salary cap on a Barkley and Elliott or Thomas last year, that led you to basically have a much lower chance of winning your Dynasty Owner League. So I think the point overall is salary matters. If you draft somebody with a lower salary, the data from 2020 shows that you increase your chances to win. By drafting a low salary player in the first round, you increase your chances of winning your Dynasty Owner League, even factoring in injuries and underperformance. So what's our conclusion? Well, we've looked at today how to draft a champion. First we found out there's no magic formula when you're talking about the type of league, the date, or the draft position, or your draft position, or the position of the player that you take. But salary matters, and that's not a surprise because it's Dynasty Owner, and that's what makes us different. We have salaries. It's not just a regular Dynasty league without salaries where you can own all the best players with high salaries. You have to fit your players under a salary cap. And if you draft somebody in the first round who takes up a lot of that salary cap, you have less money in the later rounds to get those good players that you're probably going to need to win. So then the question is, then the question becomes, do you change your 2021 draft strategy because of this if you played Dynasty Owner last year? Or maybe you're new and this is all of a sudden, this is a good idea. So now you're going to start researching what players with low salaries should you be maybe drafting in the first round and avoiding those guys like Ezekiel Elliott. But then for 2021, the interesting part is that some really prime players who were making low salaries in 2020 are going to be making a lot in 2021. So you're talking about your Patrick Mahomes and Alvin Kamara, who were on who were drafted in the first round for a lot of the top teams in Dynasty Owner last year. Mahomes is going to make $45 million in 2021, and Kamara is going to make $15 million. So do those guys buck the trend and make it so, somebody who makes a lot of salary can still help you lead your team to a dynasty owner league title? It'll be interesting to find out. We'll start drafting soon. Once the league year starts on May 18th, it'll be interesting to see what happens with all these new salaries and the drafts and everybody being in here. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Hopefully this will help you draft your Dynasty Owner Championship team. And don't forget, we've got all of our other writers and podcasts. We've got Nate Christian on Mondays, who does his prospect preview. We've got Matt the Jerk, who looks at contracts for every team. He's been doing that on a weekly basis, and that comes out on Wednesdays. And then Jay Pounds talks to you about, if you've got a current Dynasty Owner team who needs to rebuild, he talks to you about how you can rebuild that team on Thursdays. Make sure to follow the four of us, all the writers, on Twitter, and make sure also to follow Dynasty Owner at Dynasty_owner on Twitter. And thanks for watching. Thanks for reading. And I'll be back next week with another video. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye.